The land had always been quiet. It sat on the edge of a growing town, surrounded by open fields, small dirt roads, and a few old trees that had survived decades of weather. The man who owned the land never rushed things in life. He believed that slow decisions often saved people from big mistakes. For years, he had kept this land untouched, paying taxes on time, checking records once in a while, and visiting only when he needed peace. One morning, during one of those visits, something felt different. The air carried noise instead of silence. Not birds or wind, but metal clanging, engines running, and distant shouting. At first he thought maybe a small road repair was happening nearby. Development had been slowly moving closer to this area. That was normal. But as he walked further, the sound grew louder, heavier, more constant. Then he saw it. In the distance, heavy machines were tearing into the soil. Trucks moved back and forth, leaving long tire marks across land that had been empty for years. Piles of bricks, steel rods, and cement bags were stacked in neat lines. Temporary sheds had been set up. Workers moved fast, as if they were racing against time. This was not a small project. He stood still, trying to understand what he was looking at. From one angle, it looked like the start of a large housing project. From another, it felt rushed, almost secretive. No signs were posted. No project board explained what was being built or who approved it. That alone felt strange. He didn't panic. He didn't shout or approach anyone. He simply watched. Over the next few days, curiosity pulled him back again and again. Each visit revealed more progress. Foundations appeared where bare land had been. Walls began to rise. The speed was shocking. It was as if someone had decided to build an entire neighborhood overnight. What confused him most was the confidence. No one acted like they were hiding. The workers laughed openly. Supervisors walked around with clipboards, giving orders. Trucks arrived regularly, carrying materials in bulk. This was clearly not an illegal operation pretending to be small. It was bold. Too bold, he started talking to people who lived nearby. Most avoided eye contact. Some shrugged and said they didn't know much. A few whispered that it was a big project backed by strong people. One neighbor quietly warned him not to ask too many questions. That warning stayed with him. The man had seen this pattern before. When people avoided details, it usually meant trouble. When everyone claimed something was handled but no one could explain how, it often wasn't handled at all. Still, he remained calm. Instead of asking builders, he went home and opened old files. Land maps, local zoning rules, development guidelines. He didn't look for loopholes. He looked for basics, permits, approvals, public notices. Large housing projects required many steps. Environmental clearance, municipal approval, land use change permissions, public announcements. None of those things could legally be skipped, yet there had been no announcement, no hearing, no notice posted on public boards. Nothing. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not because he was angry, but because something felt deeply wrong. If this project was legal, why hide it? If it wasn't, how could it move forward so openly? A few days later, he decided to take a closer look from the roadside. He walked slowly, pretending to be just another curious passerby. A security guard stood near the entrance, more focused on his phone than on watching people. The gate was wide open. Inside, the layout was becoming clear, row after row of plots. Not 10. Not 20, hundreds. He counted roughly, based on markings and spacing. At least 100 homes were planned, maybe more. And many foundations were already complete. His chest tightened slightly. Not from fear, but from realization. This wasn't careless. It was planned. He noticed something else too. Some banners were tied loosely on poles, advertising future homes. Big promises. Modern living. Limited time booking. Easy payments. Phone numbers printed in bold. People were already being invited to buy. That thought disturbed him more than the construction itself. If families invested their savings here and something went wrong later, the damage would be huge. That night, he made a decision. He would not confront anyone yet. Confrontation gave people time to hide mistakes. Silence, when used carefully, gave truth time to expose itself. The next morning, he visited the local records office. He didn't accuse. He didn't complain. He simply asked general questions about new housing developments in that area. The clerk searched the system, frowned slightly, and searched again. Nothing came up. No registered project. No approvals. No applications under review. The clerk looked up and said maybe the request was filed under a different section. Maybe it was a private arrangement. Maybe approvals were pending. Too many maybes. The man thanked him and left without pushing further. On the way out, he noticed something interesting. Another person was waiting in line holding brochures that looked very similar to the banners he had seen. That meant sales had already started. Quietly, days passed. Construction did not slow down. In fact, it accelerated. More workers arrived. More materials were delivered. The land that once felt open and free now felt crowded and tense. He started keeping a small notebook, dates, times, number of workers, new structures, truck license patterns. He took photos from public areas, never crossing lines, never arguing with guards. Everything he did stayed legal and calm. Some evenings he wondered if he was overthinking. Maybe special permissions existed. Maybe powerful connections made rules flexible. But deep down, he knew something important was missing. Transparency. One afternoon, he overheard a conversation between two workers near a tea stall. They talked about deadlines, about pressure from above, about finishing fast before questions start. One laughed and said by the time anyone notices, everything would already be sold. That sentence settled heavily in his mind. By the end of the week, 120 homes were either planned or already under construction. 120. That number was too large to disappear quietly later. It was too large to be a simple mistake. And if something went wrong, the blame would not fall only on developers. It would hurt buyers, neighbors, and the entire area. Still, he stayed silent. People around him started noticing his regular visits. A few builders nodded politely. One supervisor asked casually if he was looking to buy. He smiled and said he was just curious. Curiosity, he realized, was underestimated. It allowed people to speak freely around you. At home, he began organizing documents more seriously. He printed zoning maps. He highlighted land categories. He marked where residential use was allowed and where it wasn't. The project land sat clearly. It's outside approved residential zones. No gray area, just a clear violation. But instead of feeling victorious, he felt cautious. Power rarely reacted well to exposure. Direct complaints could disappear. Files could go missing. Calls could be ignored. If he moved too early, the truth might be buried. So he waited. He let construction continue. He let sales expand. He let confidence grow among those responsible, because the stronger their confidence became, the harder the fall would be, and deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. What looked like a simple land issue was turning into something much bigger. A test of patience. A test of law versus influence. A test of whether quiet preparation could defeat loud confidence. As the sun set one evening behind rows of half-built homes, the man stood at a distance, watching shadows stretch across the ground. The place no longer looked like empty land. It looked like a future disaster waiting for the right moment to surface. He closed his notebook. Not with anger, but with resolve. Part 1 of the story ended there. With no confrontation, no shouting, and no warning, just a man who had seen something he wasn't supposed to ignore, and chose to respond in the most dangerous way possible, by staying silent and preparing. The morning sun rose slowly, casting a warm light over the half-built neighborhood. From a distance, the land seemed alive. Machines rumbled. Dust rose in small clouds. Workers moved in organized chaos, as if every second mattered. The man watched quietly from the edge of the road. He had been observing for weeks now, but the scale of construction still surprised him. Each day, more walls went up, more roofs appeared, More plots seemed ready for people to move in. He knew the project was growing faster than anyone should dare without permission. And yet, there was a sense of confidence around the place, almost arrogance. No one was hiding. Guards glanced at him but quickly returned to their phones. Supervisors barked orders as if they owned the land outright. Trucks carrying bricks, cement, and steel passed regularly. Some leaving even before the sun fully rose. He decided to talk to neighbors this time. Not to confront them, but to understand what they knew. Walking carefully along the dirt road, he greeted a few residents. Most smiled politely, nodded, and went back to their routines. One elderly man, leaning against a fence, spoke in a quiet voice. "Strange, isn't it?" he said. "They come, they build, and no one asks questions. I've lived here for decades. Never seen anything like it." The landowner nodded. "Do you know if they have permission?" The man hesitated, then whispered, "Permission? Not that I've seen. Some people say they're backed by big money, so no one touches them. Others just say it's none of our business. But I think something's wrong." That confirmed what he had suspected. Most people stayed quiet. Because fear or convenience kept them from asking questions. Some had faith in power, others in ignorance. But he realized that silence and inaction were as dangerous as illegal construction itself. Returning home, he pulled out his notes and started reviewing everything he had observed. Dates, times, number of workers, trucks, even the conversations he had overheard. The picture was becoming clearer. He began mapping the plots roughly on paper, marking which foundations were complete, which walls were rising, and which homes already had sales banners placed. He felt the weight of responsibility. If he acted too early, the builders might hide evidence. If he waited too long, buyers would settle in, and undoing the project would be nearly impossible. Patience, he knew, was his most powerful tool. Over the next few days, he started documenting in more detail. Every visit he made, he carried a small notebook and a camera. He never crossed into private property, but he found angles from which he could capture the growing scale of construction. Machines, trucks, and materials were all photographed. Foundations were counted. Sales banners were recorded. Every detail added to the growing collection of evidence that would one day become crucial. Meanwhile, the developers seemed more aggressive. They had started placing billboards along the nearby roads advertising homes for sale. Colorful brochures appeared in local stores. Phone numbers were printed boldly. Families began visiting, asking questions, and signing preliminary agreements. The man realized the scale of risk for those buyers. People were investing money into homes built on land with no verified approvals. That thought disturbed him more than the construction itself. He decided to investigate records more seriously. At the local municipal office, he requested public information about the project. He kept the questions general at first, asking about any new developments, permits, or land use changes in the area. The clerk searched but came up empty-handed. One tried to offer excuses about pending approvals or misfiled documents. The man listened, asked calm questions, and left without confrontation. Something inside him was growing sharper, quiet determination. This was no longer just about observation. It was about preparation. If he wanted to stop this, he had to act carefully. He could not afford mistakes. Developers who ignored rules often had connections. Confronting them directly might backfire, but gathering undeniable evidence would give him power. He also started noting patterns. The trucks came at the same times each day. Materials were delivered in bulk on specific mornings. The number of workers fluctuated, but supervisors always seemed to know exactly how many to bring in. Sales representatives moved quietly among the site, sometimes handing brochures to curious visitors, sometimes taking calls on mobile phones. The project had the appearance of order and control, but beneath that, he saw gaps. One evening, he noticed a delivery truck leaving in a hurry, dumping leftover materials at a small empty plot nearby. He made a note, took a photograph, and realized that the builders were cutting corners. They were not following rules for storage, safety, or waste management. These small mistakes were building a bigger picture proof of negligence that would become important later at home. He began organizing his growing collection. Maps, photographs, notes, and brochures were carefully filed. He labeled everything by date and location. Each piece of information felt like a small weapon, quietly prepared for the day it would be needed. The next morning, he walked around a part of the site where few people noticed him. He saw that a few plots had already walls partially built and electricity poles installed. Some homes even had temporary fencing around them. The developers were creating an illusion of a legitimate neighborhood. Any passerby might believe that. Everything was properly approved. He also started paying attention to the buyers who were visiting. Families with small children, couples looking to start a life in a new home, and older people seeking quiet surroundings. The man felt a mix of empathy and concern. These people trusted what they saw. They did not know the project had no legal approval. If construction was halted suddenly, they would be left with incomplete homes and lost money. One day, he overheard a conversation between a supervisor and a foreman. The supervisor was frustrated, saying deadlines were impossible. The foreman replied calmly that they had already assured buyers and investors that homes would be delivered soon. If questions come, we'll just claim everything is pending approval. By the time anyone realizes contracts will be signed, money transferred, he said. Hearing this, the man felt a surge of urgency. He realized the developers were not careless, they were calculating. They were confident that no one would intervene in time. But he also realized that overconfidence often leads to mistakes. People who believe they are untouchable make errors. No, those errors leave traces. He decided to start noting those errors systematically. Construction mistakes, missing safety equipment, misused land, inconsistent documentation. Everything would add to the growing pile of proof. Weeks passed. He continued observing without interfering. He started to feel invisible to the builders. They spoke freely, acted boldly, and moved as if the land was theirs. But he knew their confidence was fragile. It rested on ignorance and speed. The faster they moved, the more mistakes they made. And every mistake was an opportunity. He also began to notice the social dynamics among the builders. Some workers seemed uneasy, unsure if everything was legitimate. Some supervisors were tense, giving instructions in hushed voices. A few workers whispered about avoiding questions from local authorities. He recorded these interactions in his notebook. At home, he spent hours analyzing maps, zoning laws, and construction patterns. He compared land boundaries, public records, and municipal guidelines. He noticed discrepancies between what was allowed and what was being built. Each discrepancy strengthened his conviction that he was witnessing a major violation. One afternoon, a delivery truck carried construction materials past him. The license plate number was visible. He made a note of it, along with the date and time. Every detail counted. Every observation was a piece of the puzzle. The man also began connecting with a few trusted neighbors quietly. He shared general concerns without revealing too much. They offered small pieces of information, reports of workers cutting corners, rumors of investor pressure, and hints about pending inspections. Each piece added clarity. He realized that this project, if left unchecked, could become a massive problem. 120 homes were no small number. People were already investing. Developers were selling promises, and local authorities seemed unaware or unwilling to intervene. Yet he remained calm. He did not rush. He understood that patience and planning would yield far better results than confrontation. He was not interested in creating conflict. He was preparing for action at the right moment, with evidence so strong that no one could ignore it. By the end of the second part of his journey, the man had transformed his concern into strategy. Observation became careful documentation. Curiosity turned into calculated research. Silence became a shield while preparation became a weapon. He knew the next phase would require more attention, more subtlety, and more precision. The builders were confident. Buyers were hopeful. Neighbors were silent. But one person quietly watching and recording could change the course of the entire project. And that is exactly what he intended to do. The quiet. Land that once seemed peaceful had now become the stage for a careful game. A game where knowledge, patience, and vigilance would challenge speed, arrogance, and power. Every wall built, every truck that arrived, every conversation overheard was a step closer to the moment when truth would finally reveal itself, and the man was ready for that moment. The morning air was thick with dust and the smell of fresh cement. The construction site had grown even larger since he first noticed it weeks ago. Foundations for rows of homes were complete. Some walls had already taken shape, and temporary fences divided the plots into neat rectangles. Trucks moved constantly, carrying steel rods, bricks, and sand. The noise was constant, a low rumble that had become part of his daily observation. He walked along the edge of the road, notebook in hand, careful not to cross into private property. From a distance, he could see supervisors giving orders, workers lifting heavy materials, and sales representatives quietly handing brochures to visitors who had come to inquire about homes. The developers were confident. They acted as if no one could challenge them. But that confidence would soon be tested. He had spent weeks collecting evidence. Every delivery, every construction mistake, every conversation that hinted at shortcuts or negligence was documented. But he knew that observation alone was not enough. He needed to turn his evidence into action. He needed a plan, legal trap that would catch the developers in their own arrogance. The first step was to organize his findings. He sorted photographs by date, marking what was built each day. He labeled every truck, every material delivery, and every worker's activity that he could identify from public areas. He cross-referenced this with zoning laws, land records, and municipal guidelines. The more he compared, the clearer the picture became. Nothing about this construction followed legal procedures. Not a single permit had been filed. Not a single approval had been granted. He realized that a direct complaint to authorities would be ignored unless it was undeniable. Developers with money and connections often had ways to delay action or bury complaints. He needed something that could not be dismissed. That meant timing. That meant strategy. That meant patience. He began writing a detailed timeline of events. Each entry included what he saw, when he saw it, and how it contradicted legal requirements. He included photographs, maps, and notes from conversations he overheard. The timeline was long and meticulous, showing a clear pattern of illegal construction and deliberate concealment. Next, he researched similar cases in the region. He looked for examples where illegal developments were stopped, and he noted what worked and what failed. The common thread was clear. Evidence needed to be complete, documented, and undeniable. Authorities acted only when proof left no room for doubt. Half-hearted complaints or verbal accusations were ineffective. He needed a rock-solid case. He also began noting weaknesses in the project itself. The developers were moving fast, but that speed created mistakes. Materials were sometimes stored improperly. Safety measures were skipped. Some temporary structures were erected without proper foundations. Each mistake was another piece of evidence that showed not just illegality, but negligence. He started preparing questions for local authorities. These were not confrontational questions. They were formal, precise, and based on facts. Has a permit been issued for construction at this location? Has any approval for residential development been granted for these plots? Are there records of environmental or zoning clearance? The questions were simple, but they were designed to force official responses. If the answers were negative, they would provide official confirmation of illegal construction. Meanwhile, he kept observing the site. He noticed that the developers were selling homes at an alarming rate. Families signed agreements, paid deposits, and believed everything was legitimate. Each sale increased the stakes. If construction continued unchecked, reversing the project would become impossible without causing significant loss. He knew he had to act before too many buyers were committed to gain more clarity. He quietly spoke to a few workers who seemed less confident. He did not reveal his intentions, only asked casual questions about the process. Some admitted 2 shortcuts. Some complained about deadlines that seemed impossible. Others hinted that approvals were not in place, but they were afraid to speak openly. Each piece of information was added to his notebook, Reinforcing the reality of the illegal construction, he realized that the developers' confidence was based on two things: speed and secrecy. Speed allowed them to complete visible progress quickly. Secrecy made it hard for outsiders to find official proof. His strategy needed to counter both. He could not stop the work physically. He could not intimidate the developers. But he could create a situation where their secrets would be exposed and the law would act automatically. He also began mapping public resources that could support his case. Municipal records, zoning laws, environmental regulations, and legal precedents became tools he could use. He printed copies, highlighted key sections, and created a binder of references. This binder was not just for himself. It was evidence that could be presented to authorities, showing clearly that construction violated multiple regulations. At the same time, he monitored the sales process. He observed families visiting, asking questions, and signing preliminary agreements. He did not interfere, but he noted how the developers presented the project as legitimate. Brochures, claimed approvals, certificates, and future amenities. Each false claim was another element of evidence that he could later use to show deception and potential harm to buyers. As days passed, he started writing letters, not to confront anyone, but to establish a paper trail. He sent formal inquiries to municipal offices, requesting confirmation of approvals. He filed requests for public records related to the land, zoning, and construction permissions. Each response or lack thereof would become part of the evidence he was building. He also observed internal conflicts among the developers. Some supervisors seemed frustrated with the pace, worried about inspections, or concerned about workers' mistakes. Some arguments were overheard in public areas, providing insight into how the project was managed. Every observation added context to his legal trap. One afternoon, he noticed that a portion of the site was being expanded beyond the originally visible plots. New foundations were being dug, additional materials delivered, and temporary workers set up. The project was growing even faster. This meant that the trap needed to be triggered soon. Waiting too long would increase risk. Acting too early could allow them to hide evidence. Timing was critical. He began preparing a step-by-step plan. First, he would gather final confirmations from municipal offices. Second, he would document all ongoing construction, including sales activity and any false claims made to buyers. Third, he would compile all photographs, maps, and notes into a comprehensive file. Finally, he would submit the evidence formally, ensuring that authorities could not ignore it. He also considered potential challenges. Developers might claim that approvals were pending, they had verbal permissions, or that technicalities allowed construction. He countered each potential argument with documented evidence, highlighting inconsistencies, missing permits, and violations of law. His preparation had to leave no room for denial. As he walked around the site one evening, he realized the psychological impact of the trap he was setting. The developers believed they were untouchable. Buyers believed they were investing in legitimate property. Local authorities were unaware of the scale of the project. When the evidence was finally presented, the shock would be total. The confidence of those involved would crumble, replaced by accountability and consequences. He also thought about the people affected. Families who had invested, neighbors who were watching quietly, and even workers who had unknowingly participated in illegal construction. The trap he was setting was not just about punishment. It was about restoring fairness, protecting law-abiding citizens, and ensuring that no one could manipulate rules for personal gain. Days turned into weeks, and he continued his careful routine. Observation, documentation, and research became a disciplined practice. He kept detailed records of every truck, every delivery, every construction milestone. He updated maps and timelines. He verified every claim made by developers in brochures or during sales conversations. Finally, he felt ready. The trap was complete. Evidence was organized, corroborated, and undeniable. Every step had been carefully recorded, every mistake noted, and every false claim documented. The moment to act was approaching. He walked along the edge of the site, one last time before submitting formal requests and evidence. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over half-built walls and empty plots. The site seemed almost peaceful, yet beneath the calm, the foundation of the developer's confidence was about to collapse. He closed his notebook, knowing that patience, preparation, and knowledge had given him an advantage that no confrontation or argument could match. The legal trap was set, carefully constructed to ensure that when it was triggered, it would be impossible for the developers to deny responsibility. The quiet man who had once observed from a distance was now the orchestrator of a process that would reveal the truth. The stage was ready. The evidence was complete. The moment of shock for those who believed they were untouchable was near, and he was ready to watch it unfold. The morning air was unusually still. It's almost as if the world knew something was about to change. The construction site had grown so large that it was impossible to see everything at once. Trucks moved steadily, workers carried bricks and cement, and supervisors shouted instructions over the rumble of machinery. Families visited, inspecting plots and imagining new lives in homes that were rising faster than anyone had expected. The developers walked through the site with their usual confidence, checking progress, greeting buyers, and planning the next deliveries. But behind the calm surface, the quiet man had been preparing a storm. Weeks of observation, documentation, and careful planning were about to come to fruition. The trap he had built was ready to be triggered. Every photo note, conversation, and official record had been organized, cross-checked, and verified. Nothing could be dismissed. The developers believed their work was untouchable, but reality was about to prove otherwise. The first sign that something had changed came at the local municipal office. The man had submitted formal inquiries weeks earlier, requesting confirmation of permits and approvals. That morning, he returned to check for responses. The clerk looked surprised, almost alarmed, when she pulled up the records. "I can't find anything," she stammered. "There are no permits, no approvals, nothing filed here. How did you?" He remained calm. He had expected this. He quietly thanked her and made copies of the official statements she provided, confirming that the construction had no legal backing. These documents would be critical. They were not opinions or rumors. They were official confirmations from the authorities themselves. With that, he moved to the next step. He contacted the regional planning and zoning department, providing the timeline, photographs, and summaries of observations. He included detailed maps showing the location of every plot, the boundaries of legal land use, the discrepancies between what was allowed and what was being built. He requested an urgent review. The response was faster than he anticipated. Inspectors were dispatched immediately. Within hours, vehicles carrying officials arrived at the site. They carried cameras, forms, and clipboards. Workers stopped mid-task. Supervisors hurried to organize their notes, and sales representatives quickly hid brochures and paperwork. The confidence that had seemed unshakable only hours before was beginning to falter. He watched from the edge of the road. As inspectors walked methodically through the site, they examined foundations, checked permits, questioned supervisors, and took photos. Each inspection revealed more evidence of violation. Not a single home had legal approval. Materials had been stored improperly. Safety measures were incomplete. Boundaries had been ignored. The inspector's findings matched exactly what he had documented over the past weeks. The developers started to panic. One of the senior supervisors ran to a corner of the site, talking rapidly on a mobile phone. Another tried to calm workers, instructing them to continue construction as usual. But the presence of inspectors made that impossible. Families who had come to visit began noticing the activity. Some whispered to each other, confused and concerned. The man stayed back, calm and composed. He did not need to intervene. The evidence he had collected spoke louder than any confrontation could. Each inspector, each photograph, each official statement added weight to the case. The legal trap was working exactly as he had planned. By midday, the scene had become chaotic. Trucks waited at the entrance, unable to enter or leave without inspection. Workers gathered in small groups, unsure of what to do. Supervisors argued quietly, trying to figure out how to explain the lack of permits. Buyers arrived, confused by the sudden activity, asking questions and seeking reassurance. The developer's carefully maintained image of legitimacy was crumbling. He noted every reaction, every conversation. One supervisor whispered urgently to a colleague, "We can't fix this now. Everything is documented. They have all the proof." Another tried to reassure a visiting family, saying, "Don't worry, it's probably just a minor delay." But the inspectors had already confirmed the major violations. There was no minor delay. The project was illegal and everyone involved would face consequences. The man's thoughts were not on punishment. They were on justice. Families who had trusted the developers, neighbors who had remained silent out of fear, and workers who had unknowingly participated in violations all deserved protection. By triggering the legal process at the right time, he was ensuring that those who had acted recklessly would be held accountable, while innocent parties would be informed and safeguarded throughout the afternoon. Inspectors moved systematically through every part of the site. They measured plot boundaries, compared them to official maps, and noted discrepancies. They examined sales materials, brochures, and advertisements, identifying misleading claims about approvals and amenities. Supervisors tried to intervene, but the inspectors remained focused, their authority supported by the official documentation the man had provided. News of the inspection spread quickly. More families arrived, asking questions, and local residents gathered at a distance, curious about the commotion. The developers attempted to present a composed front, but their confidence was visibly shaken. Workers whispered among themselves, some expressing fear about potential fines or legal action. The atmosphere shifted from controlled confidence to anxious uncertainty. The man continued documenting everything, taking notes on reactions, photographing key moments, and recording statements from inspectors. Every detail reinforced the case. The legal trap he had set was not just catching the developers, it was exposing the entire chain of negligence and deception. By late afternoon, the inspectors issued a formal notice to halt construction. Copies were posted at the site entrance, making it clear that work must stop immediately until all legal issues were resolved. Supervisors tried to argue citing schedules and sales agreements, but the notice left no room for negotiation. The construction was officially illegal, and continuing work would result in severe penalties. The impact was immediate. Trucks left the site, workers were dismissed, and supervisors gathered to discuss next steps. Families who had been considering purchases left confused and concerned. Local residents who had previously stayed silent now realized the magnitude of the project and the risk involved. The quiet man watched from a distance, knowing that patience, planning, and evidence had created this moment. As evening approached, the site was mostly empty. Machinery stood idle, foundations were exposed, and walls were unfinished. The developers had no choice but to comply with the legal order. The trap had been successful. Their confidence, which had seemed unshakable, was replaced by accountability and the reality of legal consequences. The man reflected on the day's events. He had not shouted, argued, or threatened anyone. He had simply prepared, documented, and waited for the right moment. Justice had been served not through confrontation, but through careful planning and evidence. The developers' mistakes were exposed, buyers were protected from further investment, and the integrity of the land and local regulations had been upheld. Neighbors who had witnessed the events began to speak quietly among themselves. Some expressed relief that someone had acted. Others were curious about how the situation had unfolded so quickly and decisively. The man remained in the background, satisfied that the truth had come to light without unnecessary conflict. By the time the sun set, the site was quiet once again, but the impact of the day would be felt for weeks and months to come. Inspectors had documented everything. Notices had been issued. Families had been informed. The developers would now face fines, legal hearings, and potential demolition of unauthorized structures. The scale of their actions had been revealed. There was no way to hide from the consequences. The man walked home slowly, reflecting on the process. Weeks of careful observation, meticulous documentation, and strategic planning had led to this moment. He had remained patient, knowing that rushing would allow the developers to hide mistakes. He had relied on facts, evidence, and official records rather than emotion or confrontation. and the result was clear. Truth and legality had prevailed. That night, he reviewed his notes one last time. Every photograph, every document, every observation was carefully filed. The trap had been set, triggered, and executed perfectly. But he also knew that this was not the end. The legal process would continue, and the developers would face consequences in the coming weeks. He had started a chain of accountability that could not be undone. As he looked out over the distant site, he realized that the quiet land he had once observed was now a symbol of careful vigilance and justice. What had begun as a simple concern about construction had become a story of patience, planning, and the power of knowledge. The developers had been shocked. Buyers had been protected, and the law had been upheld. And the man who had remained calm and focused throughout had proven that careful preparation and patience could triumph over confidence, arrogance, and illegality. The stage was set for the final consequences to unfold. The community, the buyers, the authorities, and even the developers would soon understand the full impact of what had happened. And through it all, the quiet man remained a steady presence, a reminder that observation, preparation, and evidence could create change where others had failed. The construction site, once a symbol of unchecked ambition, now stood still, a testament to the power of strategy, patience, and legal accountability. And in the coming weeks, the consequences would continue to ripple outward, shaping the lives of everyone involved. The morning after the inspection, the construction site was quiet in a way it had never been before. The noise of machines, the shouting of supervisors, and the constant movement of trucks had vanished. Only a few workers wandered aimlessly, unsure of what to do next. The developers had been forced to halt construction completely, and the first official notices of violation were posted clearly at every entrance. Families who had been visiting plots before now approached with caution, some hesitant to enter, some demanding explanations. The man stood at the edge of the road, observing silently. He did not need to be involved directly. The law was now doing the work he had prepared for weeks. Every photograph, every note, every official document he had collected had created a situation where the truth could no longer be ignored. The developers' confidence had been replaced with panic, their arrogance now giving way to uncertainty.